Okay, so we all already know that technology can change the world, often for the better, but not always. And I'm not just talking about things like the bomb or a DIY smallpox genome, 3D printed guns, or universal surveillance. Sometimes a technology that seems great at the first outset ends up getting weird and broken after it takes over the world. And this is especially true of captive platforms that make it really difficult to innovate new solutions or even to revert to old things that worked well. And I want to argue to you that cars are one of these technologies. After 60 years and literally trillions of dollars, we are still spending an hour and a half in traffic every day. And that's not some magic free market outcome. It's actually mid-20th century social engineering writ large and baked into our zoning and land use codes. So if you're a driver, you probably don't notice this, but as somebody who chooses not to drive, it is infuriating that I cannot rent an apartment or buy a home without also forking over a few $100 a month for a parking space that I will never use. And this is not just a problem for the wild-eyed hippies like me that don't own cars. It's actually, it's a systemic problem because it prohibits us from experimenting with making other kinds of places. So our zoning codes have ensured over the last 50 years that there's basically nothing but a cul-de-sac or a parking lot within walking distance of almost every American home and job. But we know that there are other ways to make cities. We can see them throughout history and in many other countries. Boulder itself is really a good size for biking around in, but right now you have to spend part of every trip really mixed in with high-speed traffic, and that's not something that everybody wants to do, especially not somebody with small children. Now, I'm not saying that we should pry those steering wheels out of your cold, dead hands, even if you want to hold on to them, but by the same token, should we really be forcing people that don't want to drive to do so when they'd rather be walking and biking? And that is functionally what a lot of our infrastructure does today. What we need is something like network neutrality, but for our transportation network instead of our data networks. We need to stop prioritizing one mode, the car, over all others at great expense. And if we do that, I think there's every reason to believe that cities that aren't built for cars, cities that are dense and walkable, can win because they make much more efficient use of precious urban space. And that makes them much more cost effective because there's way less infrastructure per person. So these protected bike lanes you may have heard about that we're putting in on Iris and Folsom are not about, they're not about punishing cars or punishing drivers. They're about giving everybody safe, equitable access to our streets. And in a similar way, the protected lanes or the managed lanes that we're building on US 36 are about getting the transit out of the traffic that it is not causing so they can really operate at a higher level and compete on a fair playing field with cars. Really, it all boils down to a question of speed. So very modest car speeds are totally fatal to human beings, and any transportation solution that mixes cars and people together in the same space will reliably kill lots of people. Atlanta and Barcelona have about the same population, but Barcelona has 1/10 the greenhouse gas emissions because it's built for people. So this isn't just about money and markets, it's about quality of life. And it has 1/10 the greenhouse gas emissions because it's filled with streets like this, streets that feel viscerally awesome, that are really built for human beings and that make you want to inhabit them as if they were rooms and corridors, just with no ceilings. Plazas and squares that are built at the human scale kind of feel like giant public living rooms. They're small enough that you can see people across the way, but big enough that you don't have to say hi if you don't feel like it. And once we clear all the cars out of the streets, or at least calm them down enough that they know that it's not their space, you can let kids roam free off leash, even if they're not under voice and sight control at all times, which they seldom are. Getting around a city under your own power, even here in snowy Colorado, it's not about being some kind of hardcore badass. You know, if the cities are built for it and they're maintained well and you're doing it with a friend, it just becomes another part of normal daily life. People can normalize almost anything. You can brush all this off as a dream with a gruff, well, this isn't Copenhagen, but the truth is Copenhagen wasn't Copenhagen 40 years ago. It takes decades of effort to transform a city. So if we want Boulder to end up being a city that's built for people, we'd best get a move on.